They gave us a microphone, but it's not, okay, I wasn't sure if you knew.
Sorry, that might be a little above my pay grade. I'm just, I'm using this on loan right now.
Okay.
I'm like an insurance policy. I'm like the.
Did you vote for this Carolina?
I did.
My best friend is the Title IX investigator.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
He's fresh.
Yeah, they, it's funny because I went to first minister. They enacted Title IX and they brought on a social cost.
Yeah. Yes. She did the training.
That's awesome.
It's a YouTube clip.
That's the best school in America. Best house in
It starts
America.
with
I read.
It's a body cam.
Yeah, teal, like, football field.
Yeah, Teal Turf. They're 7-0. Look out. They're going to a bowl game.
If they don't die of COVID.
Fraud.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to the next, or the fourth meeting of Police Reform and Reinvention Council. My name is Sean Broden. I'm the Greene County Administrator and the chair of this group. I guess I'm going to start at the end of the table. Mr. Slutsky, would you introduce yourself and we'll go right down the line?
Gary Slufsky from Hunter.
Zoe Bizak from Temple Israel of Catskill.
Dr. Richard D. Turpin, pastor of the Second Missionary Baptist Church, Catskill.
Dr. Ronald Cook, Superintendent Catskill Central School District.
Katie Oldakowski, Director, Mobile Crisis Assessment Team, Mental Health Association, Columbia, Greene Counties.
Pete Kuzminski, Greene County Sheriff.
Adam Brainerd, Undersheriff.
Joe Stanzioni, Greene County District Attorney.
You're in the dark, Joe. So that's like, you can come forward if you want. Okay. For those, I see some familiar faces for people who are repeats. I also have some staff members here tonight because of the topic of tonight's discussion. Jason Fredenberg, if you want to just raise your hand, is the Director of our Mental Health and Community Services. Randy Omeron, Director of our 911 Center. Warren Hart, the Deputy Administrator and Director of Planning. And Captain Quinn here in the front seat as well, and then Terry Weiss also from the county. That'll be a test later on to repeat all those names. All right, Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll give you the microphone so that people can hear. You don't need a microphone? All right, well, if you can't hear, please put your hand by your ear so we know.
Hi, everyone. So this purpose of tonight's meetings is to address pages 11 through 19 of the governor's outline. We're going to break it up into two sessions. Today's mental health and domestic violence. The next meeting, it'll focus on substance use and addiction. So really, we're just asking that presenters talk about the current services that they do in Greene County, how they work currently with Greene County Sheriff's Office, and if they have an idea to further collaborate or reinvent how they work with them. Presentations will be short. We're going to ask that committee members ask questions after each presentation so that we can kind of do that and not forget what we're trying to ask. Presenters, we're going to ask that you come up to the podium, and that's kind of it. Sound good, committee members? All right. So we want to start Jason Friedenberg, Greene County Mental Health, and our Director of Community Services in Greene County.
Okay. Am I addressing?
I want everybody to
Everyone, okay. So my name is Dr. Jason Fredenberg. I'm the Director of Community Services and Greene County Mental Health. Thank you for having me. Greene County Mental Health is a community mental health center, department of the county, and we serve, it's our mission to serve any Greene County resident with any mental health issues, regardless of their ability to pay, and with respect to their, we're rewriting our mission statement. We're providing a culture of diversity and inclusiveness for our staff and clients that respects the individual dignity of all, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and gender. So we have provided services for decades in the county. The primary service that we provide is outpatient psychotherapy. We serve ages 5 and up. We have a walk-in clinic. Sorry, I'm not used to using a microphone. We have a walk-in clinic where people can come in without an appointment and receive services and engage in our services at the clinic. Currently, because of COVID, we are also providing remote services to our clients. In addition to psychotherapy, we also provide medication therapy. So our clients that are engaged in services of our county and are receiving counseling, they can also receive medication services. They can see one of our psychiatrists or our nurse practitioners to prescribe medicine. We also provide crisis services. We have an 24-hour on-call crisis service, and we work closely with MCAP and the Sheriff's Office as well. We also provide crisis in certain community interventions when there is a crisis that affects the community in some level. We were very involved in the hurricane experience, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name. Irene, thank you.
I'm trying to forget it too.
Yeah, I know, exactly. We were very involved in that throughout that whole experience. When there's been crises at schools, suicides in the community, different things like that, we've also been involved in providing services in those situations as well. One of the things that's really great about having a county-based community mental health center is the collaboration, I think, with law enforcement, especially the Sheriff's Department. We've had a really great experience with the Sheriff's Department over the years. We collaborate closely in various situations. As a community mental health center, we have the ability to, we have the authority to respond to certain crises in the community. If there is someone that is deemed to be a danger to themselves or others, we have the ability to issue what we refer to as a pickup order, which basically mandates that the person is transported from their location to the nearest hospital where they are then evaluated. It doesn't mandate that they're hospitalized. That is a different situation. That's a decision that's up to the hospital itself. But it does mandate that transportation. And we've worked with the Sheriff's Department almost exclusively around that issue. And we've always had a very collaborative experience with the Sheriff's Department around that. The Sheriff's Department, New York State law also allows police officers to also take someone who may be experiencing a mental health crisis and may pose a danger to himself or others to the hospital as well. But more times than not, I think the Sheriff's Department tends to call on us or MCAT as well to make that decision or to collaborate on that. So overall, it's been a very positive experience that we've had. Also, it's our experience that when we have certain clients that are known to us, known to the community, that have ongoing issues, what we've seen is that, you know, as they become known to us as mental health professionals, they also sometimes become known to the law enforcement officials around as well. And there's a really great collaboration, I think, in this community around that issue. There's times when we get called, or you know some of our clients that have certain issues, and it tends to be handled in a very sensitive way, is my experience, and I think largely the experience of our clinic as well. Also in New York State, there's also something called Kendra's Law, which is also referred to as assisted outpatient treatment. It's a law that came about in 1999 when someone who was non-compliant with their mental health treatment, and I think was off their medicine and was extremely disturbed, and they had pushed someone into an oncoming subway in New York City. And the family, a lot of people advocated around it, and eventually a law was passed to help certain people that are deemed to have a long and demonstrated history of noncompliance with mental health treatment. They can be essentially court-ordered to outpatient treatment. And that's something that is not taken lightly. There's only about 15 or so in Greene County that we have, but those clients tend to be people that sometimes do end up interfacing with the law enforcement, for sure. Around most of those experiences, we've also had very positive experiences where there's a lot of collaboration. You guys know who some of those clients are. Call us and we get involved. MCAT's very involved. MCAT knows most of our clients in that way as well. So those are some of the main services that our clinic provides and that relates to our interaction with law enforcement.
Is there any way that you see other collaboration, whether it's like having a copy of the AOT that law enforcement has, or
What's an AOT?
assisted outpatient treatment?
It's the court-ordered treatment, yeah.
Right. They have access to that, or it can be flagged in their system so they know that they're applying. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I know you had mentioned this. I think that's a really interesting idea. There's a lot of, I would be really interested in seeing what we could do to work to figure something out around that. It's not a quick thing that we could jump to because there's issues around confidentiality and who has access to that information. And of course, clients would have to give permission. But it's something that, if there's some way that we could work out some sort of system to create some sort of a plan for some of these clients that are frequent flyers, so to speak, or it would be something that I would absolutely be interested in working on.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes.
What are the guidelines that you use to determine when to involve the officers? When do you call the sheriff's department?
Sure. Generally, it's when we determine that someone might be a danger to themselves or others. That can be a report by a mental health professional, by a law enforcement official. It can also be a report by a family member as well. So if someone calls us and reports that their spouse may be at risk of killing themselves or something, we do an assessment. We figure out how imminent the risk is, and if it is in fact an imminent risk, then we would issue, as I referred to before, the pickup order, which we work with the sheriff's department around, and then they would dispatch to the client and transport the client to the hospital.
Thank you.
And sometimes Katie and MCAT is involved as well.
So there are checks and balances for pickup orders. If the mobile crisis team goes out and we have made an assessment that someone needs to go to the hospital but is not willing to go voluntarily, we do checks and balances with both counties. We'll run by whoever's on call at the clinic to make sure that we're not missing something in our assessment, that we're going through the safety concerns. We run the case by them, and if they agree with our assessment or if they give us some other things that we could do, they're the ones that issue the pickup orders.
Yes?
In case when someone you have to make the phone call to the sheriff. Is your agency there when the sheriff department gets there?
No, we do not respond or go on site at this point. We make a call to the sheriff's department. We get as much information as possible to provide them with, whether the person, for example, whether the person is expecting the police to show up, are they going willingly, are they not, could they be dangerous, anything like that. We try to provide as much information as possible. But then the sheriff's department would be the ones that would go. I don't want to speak for Katie, but for example, as mobile crisis, you guys do go, you are on site.
And we typically remain on the scene until law enforcement gets there unless we're pulled to another assessment.
So someone is there when the sheriff's office is there, your committee is there just to make sure of what?
I wouldn't say that we're there every single time that it's called. If we call for a pickup order, we'll typically wait for law enforcement to get there unless we get pulled. We wait usually just to make sure that they understand what's happening and understand why we did this. We don't want to do a pickup order and not have them informed for why we did it. Sometimes we don't tell them until the police get there because then it turns into a safety concern and they'll run. That's happened. That's why we don't tell them, actively. Sometimes we'll tell the family, like, can you keep them calm until, police get here, and then we'll get them, to the hospital. So it's all case by case. I can't say that every single case is the same. We work really collaboratively with the sheriff's department when pickup orders are issued, and if we leave the scene, we'll generally call dispatch and tell them that we have to leave because we have another assessment holding.
And there are also times when people go willingly as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not that police are only called when someone is resistant.
May I?
Yes, please.
On the percentage of 10, how many times would you have to call the sheriff's department out of 10 times where you were called?
Well, when we issue a pickup order, we always call the sheriff's department. We don't have an ambulance service that would transport the people to the hospital, and it is mandated that they have to be transported. So we don't issue a pickup order and then have like their mom drive them or something. It has to be law enforcement.
There are times that law enforcement will make the assessment that EMS has to transport them, usually for safety or if they're kids and under 18, and at that point they will call an ambulance to help transport.
Or if there's like a medical need, like they cut themselves,
Right.
they need
Right.
something, they're overdosing, if somebody's reportedly taking a lot of pills, even if they're acting normal at the time, that can happen just like that, they can start to overdose. So we don't take that risk. We will have somebody either follow the ambulance over to ensure that they get there, or if they're violent, ride in the ambulance, we'll have a second unit follow over to get our guy back.
We do it for de-escalation purposes also. Sometimes when we show up, people don't know how to take us, and at times we find that they want to go in the ambulance a lot more willingly than with us. So we will use that as a de-escalation factor in when we're assessing the situation, if that's an option. If they're not a safety concern and, we don't have to do it that way, sometimes we choose to do that, again, just to make them more, feel more safe and secure.
Yes.
And my question is, wouldn't that, when law enforcement arrives, wouldn't that make the situation a little worse than what it could have been if you had to ambulate and mental health personnel in?
Well, it really goes on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I'm sure, and there have been times when it might escalate the situation. That's like what Katie was saying. Sometimes we might not tell someone until they're ready to arrive. But a lot of times not. I mean, a lot of times people don't always resist, Sometimes it has, I'm not usually on site, but my experience is that, from what I hear from the clients, is that sometimes it settles the situation. They know what's happening, they know they're going, this is what's happening, and it goes from there.
Generally, the pickup order is issued because the person is beyond the amount of care that can be given in an outpatient situation. So the care for their mental health issue that they're having has stopped at that point, and our job is to get them to the care that they need at the hospital or wherever the pickup order is ordering us to bring them. So, having a mental health worker come out is not necessarily what they need at that point. It's already been determined by professionals that they need something more intensive, like Columbia Memorial.
I would say too, it's important to remember that a 945 is, that is a suspension of their constitutional rights. It's not something that is taken very lightly in any respect. So we truly try to exhaust all other resources before we issue a pickup order or ask the clinic. We don't want to do that, but sometimes, for people that are intoxicated or, have substances on board that we don't know, you can't safety plan with someone like that because they're not of sound mind. So ultimately, and if they refuse to go, we have to call police to get them there, even just to keep them safe. I can't say that every time a 945 is issued that, they are going to be admitted into the hospital. It's up to the hospital to then decide and do a further evaluation if they're going to be admitted into inpatient psych, either at the hospital or at a different facility.
So when a 945 is called, one thing is for sure, that they are leaving that home.
Correct. Yes.
Also, I should add, if the person is out of the clinic and meeting with their therapist, and we determine that they're a danger to themselves or others, and we can't coordinate in a reliable way with a family member, for example, to transport them that we feel safe with, or, you know, or if they're resisting to go to the hospital, we issue a pickup order there too, because it's our responsibility. We're mandated, we're bound by our license to take the steps that we have to when we determine that one of our patients is a danger to themselves or others. So in order to make sure that that person gets the evaluation that they need, that's when we issue the pickup order. So we have deputies based in our building as well, providing security, and they're the ones who usually handle that, organize the transportation. That tends to usually be a pretty smooth transition, because we also have the therapist there. There's a lot of support in the building. You know, there's people that can help facilitate it and make it a pretty, usually pretty uneventful.
I would just ask, just be curious, what is, from a law enforcement perspective, you hear from your clients, what's the feedback on the interaction with us? How do they feel about it? Obviously, it's a very tense situation. You know?
Yeah, you know, I can't think of specific examples exactly. I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of times when someone is going to the hospital for psychiatric reasons, especially if they don't want to go, it's not always, you know, the most positive experience on the way in. What we actually see as therapists with our clients is that when they come out, there's usually some, not always, but if we're lucky, there's some like, there's a change, there's a shift in that. There's some recognition or relief that they went, recognition that they needed to go at the time. I haven't heard specific complaints about the police, you know, and in my experience, I've been at the clinic a long time. I've been there for 19 years. And when I first started, we used whatever police agency arrived, I think, for us. But over the last, I don't even know, 10, 15 years, we've used almost exclusively the Sheriff's Department. And you know, you guys have handled things in a very smooth way, in a way that de-escalates things. That's almost consistent in my experience. Bless you.
Can I just say something? I'm sorry. So I'm from Community Action in Greene County. I'm Florence always from Community Action in Greene County. But there was an incident in our parking lot a couple of weeks ago with a child having a mental health crisis. And Catskill PD responded, Mental Health Association, mobile crisis, the troopers, and the Greene County Sheriff's Department. And your deputy was amazing. Nobody could connect to this child. And I don't know the gentleman's name. I emailed you, Pete. I don't know if you received it. But it was amazing. He did such a phenomenal job, and you deserve a lot of credit. Because what I saw in that one instance, it was commendable.
I have a question. If you get a pickup for someone who's in the village of Catskill, is it still the Sheriff's Department or does the PD come?
No, thank you for reminding me. I forget that sometimes. You're right. But it's in the village. It's the police department.
Okay, thank you.
I can't tell you how many times I'm not always on the front lines now in my role, but there's been many times I've issued pickup orders and I call the wrong police department. So thank you for reminding me.
So is your relationship with the police department in the village the same as with the sheriff when a call comes in?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a good collaborative relationship. It just doesn't happen. You know, I deal with the sheriff's office more, but I've had positive collaborative experiences with them. You know, there have been times when they've called and you know, we've worked together on things like that. So, yeah.
So addressing the lady who spoke about
Florence, yeah.
I'm sorry, first name?
Florence. Her name's Florence.
Florence. I'm sorry, Florence. There was a child that had an incident, and 3 different officers came. Did I hear that correctly?
We are right outside the village. We're on the line. So it just so happens that everybody kind of showed up.
So the state troopers, the sheriff's department, and the city, the town, village, I'm sorry, village officers all came.
Can I just speak to that? Lieutenant Gabriel from Sheriff's Office. That call originally came in as a fight in progress. It didn't come in as a mental health call. So that's why so many people responded, because we didn't know what was happening. So it came out as a people fighting in the street, actually, so.
Could you hear him?
Yes, I did. It came in as a call for a fight.
A fight in progress. Yes.
Fight in progress.
We didn't know what the situation was, so all we got was a group of people fighting. So that's why so many people responded, because we didn't know
So
who was
basically saying
involved.
for a child mental health issue, you might not normally get that much police response, but because of the nature of the initial call, that's why there were so many there.
And then you came. Once-
No, I think Katie wants to come.
Yeah, mobile
Okay,
crisis.
okay.
Yep.
And then you took over from there? Did you
So
take over?
Typically, if we get called, if the person goes to the hospital, we'll do a follow-up with the hospital and either determine if they're going to be admitted or discharged. When they're discharged, they do get referred to us if the family wants them to be, or the person themselves wants to be discharged for our follow-up. And then what we do from discharge, and Gabby will talk about that in a couple minutes too, if you want to wait, and Gabby will do a whole piece on what we do.
I want to come back to a question over here. Was the parents called for the child? You said it was a child.
It was, the incident involved the child and his father. So the father was already there.
Okay.
Can I just add something to that? The deputy who responded to that, although he's not in the SRO program now, he is a trained SRO, so he has a lot of experience dealing with children. Thank you for that email that you passed along to him.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you.
Next, we're going to do Gabby Gokul. She is Mobile Crisis Assessment Team. She is our crisis case manager.
Before she goes. Yep. This is just Michael. I think you should sanitize the microphone before you come up. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
And whoever comes up will do it.
I'll just leave it up here.
Here, I can put it right here.
I got you.
Should we?
Hi, my name is Gabby. I'm from the Mobile Crisis Assessment Team. I am currently their crisis case manager. I've been there for about 4 years now. A lot of you have already worked with Mobile Crisis, but for those of you who haven't, I'm just going to do a brief overview of the services that we provide. We provide 4 tiers of services, the first being prevention. So prior to a crisis coming in, we might get a referral or someone who just needs some added support, who may have increase in some mental health symptoms or whatever it may be. We like to offer that support, but also make sure that they're connected and linked to services to avoid a crisis happening in the future. And so we offer those support services. The second tier is crisis intervention. So this is when someone is actively suicidal, homicidal, or they're in a state where they're at danger to themselves or someone else, and we would respond to this crisis. And then we would respond in a way that would be appropriate to whatever the case may be. And like we've kind of been addressing, it's really on a case-by-case basis. Our third tier of services is post-vention. So this is when someone's already gone to the hospital and they've been discharged from either the emergency department or when they've been in an inpatient psychiatric facility. They would be referred to Mobile Crisis, and we would provide follow-up just to make sure that they're staying connected to whatever services they've been referred to, that they're engaging, that they're being supported, and that they're maintaining that stabilization once they've been discharged. And then our fourth tier is the CISM team, the Critical Incident Stress Management Team. So this is when there's been a critical incident in the community. We would work with first responders providing the mental health piece, We've also worked with family systems as well as schools who've experienced some critical incident where we would respond to add that support to them. Mobile Crisis works in teams of 2. We have a licensed professional who works with a paraprofessional. We respond both in person and over the phone. And then, of course, it's again on a case-by-case basis, so if we feel that it needs that in person, and then great, if it can be, if it's just over the phone support, we do that as well. We get referrals from friends, family, service providers, schools, law enforcement, and sometimes the clients themselves will reach out to us when they feel like they need the support or they're in a crisis. Just to kind of give you an overview of who we've served over the course of beginning in 2015, we have completed 46,056 phone calls. We have served unduplicated 2,617 clients. We have been dispatched 2,349 times with a 95% diversion rate from unnecessary hospitalization and a 99% diversion rate from police intervention, which means an arrest or a pickup order or some sort of ticket.
Those numbers are specific to Greene County.
Yes.
We cover Greene and Columbia County, but the numbers that you heard are just Greene.
Yeah.
You're good with the count.
In the spring, we started a crisis case management through Mobile Crisis to kind of provide an immediate short-term intervention for some of our more high-needs clients who have a high call volume, who are using the services often, who may not be connected to services and maybe need a little bit more support getting connected. So I would do a needs assessment and then work with them on getting engaged and then follow them through that engagement until they're connected to those long-term services and the short-term can stop. I also work pretty closely with the Greene County Sheriff's Department. They have an Impacted Citizens program where they respond to individuals in the community who recently overdosed. They make that connection and build a rapport with the clients and provide resources, and if they are interested in further services, then the Sheriff's Department will then refer them to Mobile Crisis for services. And so I will work with them to kind of address whatever the needs are for their recovery, help get them connected to those supports so that they can focus on their recovery, whether it be substance use or mental health in both aspects. So this is just like one of the ways that we work with Greene County Sheriff's Department. We also work with law enforcement, often when they are responding to a mental health call. They obviously have their own procedures, policies, trainings on how to respond to those, and at times if they feel warranted, they'll make a call to us as well, whether it be just to add support to the client after the call, to follow up, to help connect them to services if that's kind of what the identified issue is. And I think really that's Mobile Crisis's goal to move forward working with law enforcement is to somehow be built in so that when there is a mental health call, we can be notified and then provide the follow-up after that to make sure that they're connected with services, they're being supported, and to help decrease the need for further police intervention in the future for those mental health reasons if it's possible. So, if any of you have any questions, you can take them now. Yeah.
Was there any follow-up on the case with Florence with the child?
I was not here for that day. Are you or Katie?
Typically, for every crisis assessment, there's always follow-up, whether it is a check-in, connection to mental health services, or the disposition from the hospital to see if further intervention is warranted. So while I can't speak to specific cases, I can just tell you our protocols. And just so you know, too, it's not one and done. We do 3 rounds of calls in a day. So if someone's on our radar, we'll call them 3 times for 2 days, and by the 3rd day, we usually go out in person to check on them and make sure that they haven't fallen off. COVID's changed that a little bit. But
So you can't tell us if there was a follow-up with the father and the son, or whether it was boy or girl, I don't know, but the father and the child
There's
that have an
typically,
incident?
for all crisis assessments, there's always follow-up.
Thank you. Thank you.
I couldn't understand the percentages you were giving and what they were for.
So the percentages were the diversion from hospitalization and from police intervention. So when we go out, our goal is always, if possible, to divert from hospitalization and police intervention. Of course, that's not always possible, and sometimes it's really needed. But with a lot of our calls, the diversion rate from hospitalization is 95%, and then for police intervention, which would be an arrest or a ticket or it would the 941 pickup, the pickup order, it's a 99% diversion rate. So we always try to find a way to respond to the crisis, come up with a safety plan, find a way to approach it where they don't have to go to the hospital if it's safe for them.
Thank you.
And I would say too, the cost savings for mobile crisis, an average ER visit for mental health is about $2,250 to $3,000, depending on the reimbursement rates. So when you're looking at diversion, it's really a cost-saving mechanism for healthcare. Same for EMS, law enforcement. You're trying to save the costs associated with the time and the calls so that they don't go and waste it if it's not necessary.
Are there any other questions?
All right, thanks, Gabby. Good job. All right, George Hill, Ulster County Sheriff's Office, is presenting on the Helping Everyone Overcome Resiliency Program. For those committee members who have a copy of just the informational PowerPoint.
I don't think I'm going to hold this, hopefully. Hear me. Try to talk loud. All right, so you have the packet in front of you. Like she said, I'm George Hill from the Ulster County Sheriff's Department. I've been there for about 21 years, a little too long. In the Sheriff's Office, one of the main things that I got assigned to was the Critical Incident Stress Management Team. We've responded all over the country pretty much in this region, everything from 9/11 and so on. So we've actually come up and we've partnered with Greene County and we've done a lot of CISM stuff together. You guys know what CISM is? Critical Incident Stress Management? Yes?
Take that as a no. No.
All right, when you're looking at the critical incident stress management, it's the concept of looking after the first responder community. They're going to be responding to things that most people will not experience in their whole lifetime. They're going to be dealing with infant deaths. They're going to be dealing with pretty brutal car accidents, fires, etc. So that's pretty much where the critical incident stress management team comes from. It's a peer-led team, and it introduced mental health services and support services for the first responder community. And in turn, when we're looking at this HERO project, one of the things that they're looking at, or the reason why we're looking at it in this committee or this forum, is the fact that Governor Cuomo's office put out an officer wellness program. So we've already had this actually started. We started about 2 years ago. I've been down in New Jersey. When it comes for the basis, do we have to wear this when we're talking? When it comes down to the basis of why we're actually doing this in this form right now, is the fact that it's already been worked into it, but the governor's office has seen that officer wellness needs to be built into the reform package. And that's simply for the simple statement. Have you ever heard hurt people hurt people? Have you guys heard of that before? Okay. So that's the basis that comes behind this. What the HERO project actually does is it takes some of the things that we already have in place, and then it actually has some sort of tracking to it. The fact that some agencies do it or some agencies don't, this is going to create a program that every agency throughout the state of New York, but obviously it's being birthed here in Ulster and Greene, that they'll have a follow-up for each agency, that somebody's looking out for the mental health of the people. So if you look at the first 2-3 pages, we like to take studies and we like to look at it and compare it. So I'm not going to go over all the numbers,
But one of the takeaways you look at the number is it's a Canadian study. Obviously, some Canadians, some people think that they are a lot nicer to each other than Americans. So when we look at the numbers are pretty big. When you're looking at the general anxiety, you're looking at post PTSD or trauma and stuff of that nature. If you can look at those numbers, the GAD is your general people, and then you start looking at the other first responder communities. I think one of the things that you look at it, when you start looking at the law enforcement field, they have sometimes 2, 4, 5 times the general infliction of said mental health disorder. So like PTSD is a big one. I know it was a bad word for years, but you're looking at police having a 19% rate, where your general population, you're looking at 1 to 3%. So obviously that was a problem. And when we were looking at this program a couple of years ago, we knew it was something that needed to be instituted, and that's why you have the governor's office instituting it through this police reform package. The reason why we were instituting it was because of the suicide rate amongst the first responder community. When you look at the data on page 3, suicide data so far this year, looking at 125 police officers have committed suicide that work. Excuse me?
It's 147 now.
Okay, 147, more updated numbers. We're obviously not going in the right direction. This is where and why this program was started a couple of years ago. When I actually went down in Jersey, New Jersey instituted this program statewide and mandated it through their DA's office and their police agencies. In Greene and Ulster, we seem to maybe go big or go home. We're going to institute it straight across the board for all first responder communities. It's going to be police, fire, corrections, EMS, etc. When you get into the training, and this is why it was actually built into the whole police reform package, is the statement I said before, hurt people will hurt people. The resiliency is a culture change. It's actually going in and doing training that involves getting people that would connect more with their emotions. When you go to the police academy, they teach you how to hide your emotions. They teach you how to, push them down and don't worry about them. You can deal with it afterwards when your career is over. The point of the resiliency training and changing the culture is to get officers to seek help a lot quicker. A lot of times people don't understand, and I think you're going to show a video, right? It's probably a nasty video. Some people don't understand that that officer just dealt with a shooting or whatever he may have dealt with, and now he's pulling somebody over, and they can't understand why he's so nasty. So the whole concept is this is a resilient project model. So it's going to be a culture shift with training. And then when you actually get into the actual modules of it, you're looking at resilience on page 3 still. The self-help techniques, eating habits, sleeping habits, trying to do the best with what you're actually being dealt with. The main concept behind the resiliency project is to take some of the services that we already currently have, which is CISM, which is EAP programs and stuff of that nature. Those are all reactive programs that we've had for years, and this is where we're finding out that we're stumbling a little bit. Because A, the culture was never changed. B, nobody wanted to go talk to, we used to call him the wizard in my agency, so it was always looked down upon. The concept of resilience is it's going to be a proactive approach. So this is going to be where your agencies will have a person within their agency that is going to be trained in resilience and be able to identify that officer or that dispatcher that seems to be pretty close to the edge and needs some sort of mental health services. And that gets into page 4 of when you look at these handouts, the actual training model. Obviously, initial training, we have to get it into the academy setting and an annual setting. The peer support model, right now, Greene and Ulster, we're looking great in it because we currently, right now, have a CISM team in both areas. And they're supported by strong mental health agencies within our jurisdiction. A couple of things that are going to be a little bit more proactive is when we start to get into a family support model. No one's talking to the husbands, the wives, or the kids. And what we're looking to institute is some support for the family. Because if there's going to be anybody that is going to see this officer that is maybe taking a turn for the worse, it's going to be the family. And that way, they can actually turn to that resilient officer within the agency, or we'll give them a list of names in other agencies if they're afraid to go to their own agency, and know where to get that reach and that help for that officer and the family as well. Peer recreation, a couple of things. Initially, I really didn't follow this until I found myself I'm a Army veteran. I found myself in the middle of a kayak building class thinking we were just building kayaks. What I started to find out was this wasn't a kayak building class, this is a peer recreational thing because we had a mental health person there. I ended up not finishing it. I turned it over to one of my buddies in the sheriff's office and I asked him, I said, hey, can you finish my kayak for me? Because he was unfortunately starting to circle the toilet bowl. He was getting in trouble, he had anger issues, etc. Right now, a year later, he completed the kayak. He rode a kayak from Albany to New York City. He did it in the name of veterans, and he has completely turned himself around. He's the president of the union at the sheriff's office. So these type of peer recreational programs can definitely have a positive impact on the officers. Yes.
What's your name, sir?
George.
George, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
I want to go back to what you said, that you asked the person.
Yes.
I want to use, are you a football fan?
I'm a Buffalo. See, I like Buffalo, so that really blows me out of the water.
Yeah, they're 6-2.
So I said that to say that you do watch football.
Yes.
They have a protocol that if someone was in a collision, as many are on a football field,
yes,
it's not the captain of the team, or it's not that person that says, I think they should go into the protocol booth. It's a call from upstairs who saw the collision.
Yes.
They're not on the field, but they saw the collision, and then they send word down, and that person has to go, regardless if it's Brady or any other star, no matter who it is.
Yes.
They have to go in.
Well, the concept, and I understand what you're saying, that you have that one person making that call. The concept of training everybody in initial training and annual training is you'll have everybody trained to know what to look out for. You'll have a person within the agency working in the trenches with the guys that'll be able to identify that. And most agencies will have a CISM officer as well. Where we started to stumble a little bit, and I think I understand where you're trying to go with this, was CISM was really never one of those proactive type of systems where the resiliency is supposed to be proactive. This is where we're sitting a person down in an agency for 3-4 days and telling them these are the warning signs you need to watch out for, and this is how you go about it throughout your agency. Some agencies, they're going to go to the top. Some agencies won't feel comfortable doing that. They'll actually reach outside of the agency. So, for an example, I have Town of Ulster. I have that resiliency officer call over to me and say, hey, we don't trust anybody within the agency. Can you get this guy help? He's having issues at home. He's got anger issues on the streets, etc. Can we get him some help? So I've had other agencies reach across.
Okay. I'm glad you said that.
See, my thing is, professionals, whether it's officer, educator, whoever it is, you've been on the job for a long time, and you have a skill sometimes to hide stress or different things that you're going through. So what happens if that person doesn't exhibit some of those concerns or those red flags that may pop up?
As in anger, that's the most common
When
thing that we
someone's
see.
calm all the time, they don't exhibit any of those tendencies, and it kind of slips underneath the radar.
And we've had issues, so like you're saying, red flags that don't pop up, such as anger issues.
Exactly.
We are going to see something, and or the whole concept of getting the family support model there as well, and annually doing family support training / we can't make it a training, it's more of a symposium of the agency.
What if they don't have a thing? They're a single person.
Well, if they don't have any of those and they're not throwing any symptoms, it's going to be difficult to identify that. But most people within an agency has that go-to person. And there's been many times where I've had a couple of people, they come to me and we talk about everything. And we've had, situations where I had to bring those officers out for help. We normally have somebody to lean on.
Okay.
Gentlemen, we have actually used him. I've reached out to him, and I think you'd be surprised, just as like, you know, maybe you don't work with police officers, but you work with teachers, how close-knit they are. Police officers are exactly the same, and we don't want any one of our brothers or sisters to falter. And as soon as they start acting a little differently, we notice it, the talk amongst each other starts, and action is taken. So I myself have reached out to him for help with members as soon as they started exhibiting something where it came to me that there was a concern, and we've addressed it.
I think another thing you have to look at is the concept that this program is not completely instituted at this point. We started 2 years attempting to institute this, and not until this reform package came out did it actually get pushed to the front, because everything costs money, so you have to have a reason. So that's why we are actually, fast forwarding this program within the region. So right now we don't have the family, peer, or resiliency, the recreation. All we currently have right now is a very minor mental health trainings area, which some of the officers, I'm pretty sure Greene goes into CIT. So they get that, which is good, but that's not mandated in the academy just yet. And then we have SISM teams. So if you're looking on page 4, that top one in left-hand corner, we don't have the whole program instituted yet at this point. The good thing about it is the fact that once this gets instituted, it's a structured unit throughout the region.
Thank you. Now, I want to touch bases on something that you said there, because we're here to try to reform some things that could get, if you see there's a gap somewhere, I'm trying to help.
Yes.
Now, the officer, and I'm not pointing at no one, but I want us to keep a clear mind here. An officer was just in a trauma, seen something, had to deal with something, right? There's no protocol that says before you go on another call, you need to, there's no one to say, because what you said was maybe that next person that they had, he wasn't so friendly. But I want to bring to you, that could be the point of African American men feeling threatened by driving because they're black. Because that officer could have just left a trauma situation, and here's 4 guys in a car, and they may look like they're having fun, but the officer's not having fun, and when he gets pulled over because he didn't put his flasher on, something can escalate. And that's why things can spark.
Exactly, and that's why out of several areas that the governor's office looked at, he's looking at officer wellness. At this point in time, we don't have a good, solid wellness program put together because there's no mandates at this point, except for the law enforcement community is the only one, and it's, I believe, 16 hours? I think it's 16 hours in the basic academy, and that's pretty much what they get, and that's it. What we're asking for is further training with this Hero Resiliency Project. Now, sometimes you're playing with fire when you talk about protocols and whatnot. You could have an instance where you have an incident and you wipe out a whole agency, and if you had a protocol that said if they were involved in a trauma, that they have to be benched. You could ultimately bench a complete agency and you'll have no police coverage. So you gotta be very careful on how you write the protocols in that.
I understand that, but let's just use the example again to the football team.
Yes.
It could be the running back and the quarterback and the center. Collision, somebody calls and says, wait a minute, for the betterment of the future and the next play, somebody gotta go, you gotta get examined, or you gotta go in the tent. So I understand what you're saying, and I think the wellness program, I think that'll be something, Linda, if you put some parentheses around there, we can talk about that, and maybe sink our teeth into it, and help that out.
good question, I don't understand. So who would that officer check in after he or she witnessed that traumatic incident before saying you're all clear, now you can report to the next incident?
Check-in as in?
Is there a check-in after a traumatic incident before that officer is sent to the next incident or responds to another incident?
I can't speak for what happens up in this region, but I can tell you that child deaths, difficult car accidents that are going to deal with, when you get to your critical incident, our sergeants are trained in our agency that those guys are actually going to kind of be held for a little while, whether they go to headquarters or they pull those people to the side and they call the SISM team. It all depends, you know, on the actual incident itself. But there's been many a times we've been called out as a SISM team and or our support services. Like we had a situation involving a child homicide. And what we did right away for our agency was we pulled those guys out, brought them to headquarters, sat them down for a couple minutes, got them fed, watered, and then we just talked to them for a little while. And then we gave them some information packets to bring home to their, you know, family, if they have family, to kind of give the family a heads up of, hey, you might be seeing these type of issues.
I think it's important to remember too that Greene County is like half of Ulster County. So they cover a huge area with a much larger population. It's just over Greene and Columbia County combined in both population and territory.
I think one of the big things of the concept behind this is a SISM team is only so big. When we train all first responder communities, smaller PDs, etc., in this model, that gives a larger pool of people that have additional training in wellness, coping mechanisms, etc., and also support services contacts to actually push out into the field and get it to the first responder community.
Rabbi Zoe has been trying to ask the question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So my question is this, twofold. One is, how is this program funded?
Yeah.
And is the fact that it isn't more widely happening and not all of the PowerPoint, the bullets here, all these things aren't happening, is it a funding reason?
Yes. Two things. I told you we've been doing this for almost 2 years. I was in Jersey last year to see how New Jersey launched the resiliency project across the board. I went to their summit and then that broke out how that was going to happen. We initially, for this region, Greene Ulster, we put in for a LEMA grant, which was to grant this project and get it up off the ground. Unfortunately, we really don't, it looks like we're not going to get that in this region. But I do know that since the police reform that was launched by the governor's office, my sheriff turned to me and told me, it doesn't matter, we're gonna have to find a way to do this. And our product launch is scheduled for January, is what we're looking at. So we don't have any news here, right? Because my sheriff will probably skin me for saying that. But that's, our product launches then. And he's just gonna have to find the money. He said he'll find it.
The other question is this just for the sheriff's department or is it the sheriff's department and the police department?
It's for all first responders. Like I said, we kind of bit off a little bit more than, you know, most agencies or most states have. We're looking at doing this across the board for fire, police, corrections, dispatch, which gives us a bigger pool when we have problems in the law enforcement community. We can pull from the fire side of the house because there's a lot of firemen and cops that are both. They wear both hats, or they're medics and cops.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I have two questions as well. What does the approach look like? So you receive a call from, say, someone who identifies that there is someone in law enforcement struggling. Who goes out? Who's trained? And how does that approach look to that person who might not be?
Well, that's a multi-facet. And right now, as it is, the SISM team, and so we have coordinators. We have Lieutenant Joseph Decker. He's actually out of the Corrections Division. And we have a lady out of probation, which has a stronger mental health background. Depending on the situation, if it's, more marital issues, or there's, say, some sort of issue dealing with, job-related malpractice, so to speak, we will actually have a peer make contact, but most likely in that situation do a quicker handoff to the mental health side of the house. The big thing is I've been to guys that wanted to speak to a faith base. I've had people that want to talk to just a peer, just a cop, just a fireman. We normally, I would say 99% of the time, will always do it with a mental health professional. It's a peer-led program, but we need mental health there to, find out if there's any indications of something deeper than what I say. And I think the peer-led concept is the fact that you need that trust.
And just my second question is that we work, I think I'm up next to talk about my program, but we work with law enforcement on our team at the Child Advocacy Center. And part of what we incorporate into that is a debriefing, when we see the fatalities, the horrific effects of child abuse. And we do try after an investigation, after an interview, sit down and process a little bit and debrief. And for agencies such as mine, if I do see that someone, a first responder, is still struggling, is there something incorporated into that where I could reach out?
Yes.
And make that?
So one of the things that we actually instituted on page 4, if you actually look at it, there's going to be a whole mental health side of the house. So you can either reach to the mental health side of the house or you could reach to one of the resiliency officers. The way it is right now, it's all CISM. Most of our CISM people are not identified that are mental health. It's usually just the peers. But we have our, if I know it's this type of personality, I'm going to use this person, etc. One thing I want to also end this so that way you guys don't think we just came up with this on our own. I was in the Army before and I told you that this was actually birthed in the United States military. This is something that they put out in the military. They instituted it incorrectly, in my opinion, because they gave it to the chaplains to do. Unfortunately, that's not really the group you do it at. And the FBI ended up turning around and taking it from the military and making it truer to what you see in these packets. And that's actually the agency that we are working with right now to get the training into this region so that we can get it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
I want to use the gentleman's analogy with the football, concussion football. If someone's injured, you see that they're injured, or they've been in a traumatic situation. Right now, as you're speaking, there is no mandate in the system, correct?
And with
a mandate, as in you must speak to someone.
There is and there isn't, because then you're starting to border some issues with HIPAA and whatnot. We have had staff that were required to either speak to CISM or they need to speak to EAP. Now that's my agency. That is not a mandate across the board for all law enforcement agencies, mainly because those resources most likely aren't set up in smaller agencies.
It's a good. It sounds like a good program because you do a hard job, and there should be people looking out for your wellness. But I believe within that program, there should also be a mandate. You've just seen something that's completely off the wall. We're human. We're all human. You should probably talk to someone.
Yeah.
People are affected by things every day. That could be someone who goes out and, if at the end of the day we're talking about public safety, you're protecting the public. Can you really send someone out who's had a seriously traumatic injury?
I think it's also, maybe to go a little bit further, for you guys to understand that in New York State, they are starting to recognize PTSD as a disability in the first responder community. I had the unfortunate effect that I had my sergeant die in front of me. So we had a line of duty death. We actually, from the dive team of 20 people, we lost 2 to PTSD as a disability. So yes, in circumstances like that, we were mandated to go see the wizard. So what we're trying to do is create a different terminology and a more better coping mechanism for the staff, and also to be a little bit more hip to the concept of getting help.
all programs are more effective when you want to see help.
Yes.
But there are also times when you.
And that's the concept behind HERO, is the fact that it is a peer-led program. But the component of mental health being a partner in this is critical. Good?
Any other questions?
Off the record, I'm a Chicago Bear fan.
Thank you, George.
No problem. I'll clean
Thank
this up for you.
At a bar, or if there's any way that their character can be disparaged and it comes down to word versus word, you know, people know and they understand. And oftentimes they come to us, they call us, and one of the things we do after we talk with them is we say, why don't you meet with one of the investigators we work with? You can ask them questions. There's no, you know, requirement beyond, you know, your curiosity, and we can see what happens next. And I can tell you in 90% of those conversations, the individual does end up reporting the crime and working very closely again with law enforcement and with prosecution. I see Joe is here, you know, and him and his ADAs are also very present as part of that collaboration. So our program, like I said, one of the backbones, one of the foundations is our collaboration with law enforcement and seeing, you know, our clients, our victims turn into survivors, and understand from that point on, our children understand that law enforcement is there to protect them and will work with them and will be there, you know, throughout the duration and beyond. You know, and again, I had mentioned when we were speaking earlier, part of what we do as a team is we get together before, we interview the child, we get together after, and we debrief, because we do have fatalities, we do have some very horrific cases, and we all take that opportunity to work with each other to really process the things that we see day to day and support each other. Like I said, so just so you guys know, I brought these up. I have these brochures. I put them out there for everybody, so take as many as you want and whatever you want. And, you know, call us anytime you need.
Yes, I heard you say a few times that you work very closely with law enforcement. What would you do in an instance where, I mean, the complaint is against law enforcement?
If the allegation is against law enforcement, I mean, if the allegation of abuse, like child abuse, is
It doesn't even have, I'm going to give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
I was last in Greene County Jail in 2016. There was an allegation of abuse from one of the COs, between an and the CO. The individual actually called Reach on the three-way after they called home, and they were told by Reach that they weren't allowed to go into the jail because of their policy. Has that policy changed, or?
That policy has changed.
So
to my
you are allowed
knowledge.
to go to the jail now? Well, it's not now because it's not there yet, but.
But actually, that's one of the things we're working on right now with law enforcement, is having space and availability and access. Because there is what's called PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act.
But if you can't go into the jail, PREA is useless.
Right, so the Reach Center has the MOU, and had the MOU with the jail and with the facility and with the sheriff's office. And we did receive some complaints, and when we were denied access, we did send those complaints further on to the state and to the people.
Did you follow up afterwards to see what might have happened?
PREA.
Did you follow up afterwards after you sent them up to see what might have happened?
I can tell you that we did follow up, and you know, at that point, to my knowledge, I was not included in the final outcome of that. But if we are denied access through PREA, there is a protocol to send it up further and further to people who can't be denied. And that's my understanding.
Access through PREA then? Like PREA was, you said you were denied access through PREA or by the administration of the jail?
The jail. But that was, you know, many years ago. But right now, like I said, in
There's a new sheriff.
Yes, there's a new sheriff, and we've actually been talking about the MOU, and I think we actually developed the MOU. You have it for review. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for that question. It's very important.
Committee, any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Julianne.
You're welcome.
All right, next is Lawrence Oley, Community Action.
Hi. First off, I just want to thank you all for doing the work on this committee. I know it's mandated, but you all have a lot on your plates, but it's important work, and thank you. So Community Action has been in Greene County since 1967. We came up with President Johnson's War on Poverty right alongside the Civil Rights Movement. There are over 1,000 community actions in the country. All of them have very different programs based on the needs of that community. Here in Greene County, we do a lot of emergency assistance. We have an emergency food pantry. We coordinate federal and other resources for the food pantry and distribute to pantries throughout the county. We do a lot right now with housing and homelessness, which is a major issue, affordable housing. Getting worse with COVID, as everything is. We have a weatherization assistance program. We do seasonal programs. We're hosting our 5th Thanksgiving dinner. We have 150 people on the list already for home delivered meals. We have our Christmas program coming up. We do free income tax assistance. But what we're here tonight to talk about is really 2 programs where we would have the most interaction with the Sheriff's Department, and that is our Columbia Greene Crime Victims Advocacy Program and our Domestic Violence Program. So through the Victims Advocacy Program, funded through New York State Office of Victim Services, any innocent victim of crime can get assistance. We can help them file an order of protection. We can help them navigate the legal system. We do court accompaniment, referrals, and people might be eligible for some kind of restitution through OVS, and we can help them file that claim. Through the Domestic Violence Program, which also serves both counties, we have a 15-bed shelter in Columbia County, a 10-bed facility in Greene County. We take men and women and their children, any victim of domestic violence. We offer support counselors. We are not therapeutic counselors, but we offer support counseling. Again, assistance navigating the social service system, the legal system, any kind of restitution, again, claims with Office of Victim Services, and referrals to other supports. And that can be the REACH Center, it could be the Child Advocacy Center, it could be the Mental Health Center, Greene County Mental Health, along those lines. We have a 4-unit apartment building for transitional people leaving our domestic violence shelters, not quite ready for independent living. We offer that in Columbia County, and then have a HUD supportive housing project for people leaving our domestic violence shelters. We also offer non-residential services of domestic violence. Not everybody needs shelter, not everybody wants shelter, but they need to know what their options are. And we have a wonderful non-residential counselor that serves both counties. She's been with us going on 20 years, and she offers court accompaniment, assistance with orders of protection, referrals to other services, and individual and group support counseling. We don't have a lot of direct interaction with the Sheriff's Department, but when we need you, you're there, and we appreciate that in all aspects of the program. Often our staff will reach out to you to see if an order of protection has been served. But one of our greatest weaknesses, I think, our greatest failures, is having a better relationship. One thing, several years ago, your predecessor was in office as a sheriff, but I was reading the annual reports on the county website. And on the sheriff's annual report, he spoke about an uptick in domestic violence cases. So I go to our program director, how many referrals do we get from the Sheriff's Department? And it was not many, if any. So at that time I reached out because we have a wonderful community educator, and we would love the opportunity to come in and speak to the sheriff's deputies, talk about the dynamics of domestic violence and what services we can offer. We were never able to make that connection. I know we've spoken about it, but then COVID and everything's kind of crazy right now. But that's one of our major goals, is to be able to come in and address that. The other area where you have been an active partner is the Columbia Greene Domestic Violence Task Force, and that's something that was funded in part with the Legal Aid Society of Northeastern New York. And it's a group of service providers, law enforcement, basically the entire community coming together for a coordinated response to domestic violence. And again, COVID that's kind of been on hiatus, but we really need to get back to that work, and you're really active partners in that. And it's important we're all on the same page and that we recognize some of the warning signs. One of the things we were working on is a lethality assessment. There are certain things we see in domestic violence cases that are real indicators that that person's life could be at risk, such as strangulation. So that's important work that we need to get back to. The other thing we would love to be able to do is when you go out on a case, domestic violence, to refer at that point to our program. I don't have any with me, but I have brochures but not palm cards to let people know that the services are here and that somebody is there to talk to. Everything that we do is self-determination. We don't talk to people about going into shelter. You should. They know when they're safe. They know what they can and cannot do. But we are 24/7 available. We have somebody on our hotline and are available to assist people and just help them make safe choices. One of the big things we do as well, most important thing that we do is safety planning. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak to you all, and I'm here to answer any questions. But those are our goals, because as I said, what I witnessed that day in the parking lot was tremendous, and I know I have nothing but good things to say about our local police. I know we don't see the issues maybe in this community that we see on the news and in more rural communities, but it's very important work. We can always find room for improvement, and it's always good to take stock and identify strengths. So thank you so much. Yes, sir.
First, I would just like to say thank you for your service. The Second Missionary Baptist Church has worked with your agency and has worked with the village police, and we kind of did a triangle, and we all worked together well and through the domestic violence. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for trusting us, that we were able to be an advocate to help out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Committee, any other questions? All right. Thank you, Florence. Sean, I think that's it.
Okay.
I'm giving it back to you.
So the,
Oh.
Sometimes.
yes, sir. You call him doctor. So the major portion of the agenda tonight was these presentations. I don't know if there's more community questions about past presentations or any of the previous topics that we've had. We're certainly not done yet. We have many more meetings scheduled to go. So, committee members, is there anything you want to go from tonight on this presentation, Brad?
I would just like to thank all of the presenters. I love hearing about what you all do. It's such beautiful, essential work, and thank you for educating us about all that you're doing in this county. It's so admirable. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. Joe, you've been quiet tonight. Any comments that you were picking up on?
Well, actually, now that you mention it, I was talking about the stress.
Can you pull forward a little bit so we can hear you?
We'll see. You can see hide me in the dark here, but we talk about the stress team, and the issue was raised that do we do things that are preventative? Because a lot of this, when you start to see signs of stress and things of that nature in our officers, well, then you approach them and try to do something to divert that and give them some sort of help. But do you do things to prevent those stressors? I mean, a lot of things that I'm seeing, or some of the things that I'm seeing when there's an issue, are police officers, and it's actually more with the state police, and it has to do with their work schedules. And I hear these officers say, well, look, I haven't had a day off in 10 days. Working 10 days, 12-hour shifts consistently, and during that 10-day period, I've had a situation where they sent me home for 4 or 5 hours and then called me back in for mandatory overtime. And And that's a big concern to me because, you know, that creates a situation where things happen that otherwise might not happen. And it concerns me with this particular program because the state police seems to be exempt from that, from the police reform. And yet that's where I'm seeing a lot of the situation where police officers are retiring, police officers are leaving the job, police officers are getting hurt, and their spots are not being filled. And so now you have a situation where these officers that are working are required to work many more hours than they normally would work. So you have a situation where, you know, in Albany they're saying we want to put together police reform and health situations, and yet at the same time, maybe these officers, we should pay a lot more attention to the hours that they're working, the situations that they're encountering. Have they been involved in a catastrophic situation? Do they need some time off as a result of that? Should there be mandatory time off when you're an officer who arrives at an accident scene or somebody dies? So I guess my question is, as far as the stress team, is there anything out there where our police agencies are closely scrutinizing the hours that are being worked, the situations in which officers are involved in, and kind of monitoring that so that we're not getting to that point where now I'm seeing an officer break down or after, you know, out of sorts or something of that nature. So I guess that's one of the questions that I have.
I mean, we do have restrictions on the hours that the officers can work. So in a 24-hour period, an officer has to go home free. So we're not, I mean, unless it's just the most unbelievable incident that we just need them. The general sense is that once you get to about in that 12 to 16 hour range, you start to go downhill. It's, when they do studies on this stuff, it's like that when you become tired to that point, some of the fine motor coordination and things is equivalent to somebody who maybe had a couple of drinks, right? Because they're tired and fatigued. So we generally try to stay underneath that, give them that 8-hour break on a regular basis in terms of the mandate after they see or are involved with something catastrophic. There's not anything hard and fast. I think we do a pretty good job, though, at our agency, kind of keeping track of people, understanding and knowing what calls they went to, knowing what the officers' dorms are, keeping in contact with them, and seeing that differentiation if there is. I mean, I can speak for the captain and myself. We definitely, you know, over the years and coming with experience, unfortunately, we've become good at detecting stuff like that. We recognize it right away when the symptoms do come about.
So you do sort of have a system.
We do.
There's no direct policy at this point, but luckily enough, we're small enough to
If there is a call
have that.
that's going to result in something like that, myself or the lieutenant are going to be at it anyway. And we most of the time call mobile crisis to the scene, even not just for our own officers, but for the family, if there's family involved, but also have used them for our own officers just to check on the responding officer. That's happened many times.
Any major incident that we've had in this county, we've actually had George and Susan. We had everybody involved, and it was 3 police agencies the last one. We all met, and we all had individual meetings with the system team, debriefing.
Sheriff, is 12 to 16 hours kind of the norm?
Well, they're on 12-hour shifts.
Oh, yeah, 12-hour shifts. Thank you.
16 would be if they get stuck on something. Like if they're in their 12th, it's not regularly scheduled. But if they get to 16, we won't allow them to work any longer.
And how much break would there be before they would start up again?
It could be 8 hours, but if it's going on their 2 or 3 past days, it could be days before they come back. But it's a minimum of 8.
Minimum.
Minimum.
Your question?
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of, I mean, even with CISM and the point that he brought up with, the amount of time that it's also, I keep hearing with, you know, these officers looking out for each other, and we watch each other, or checking in on each other. I mean, this is cops, this is police, this is how we got here. No one has oversight. Is there any point where someone's looking and saying, no, you can't work another hour? No, I mean, truckers have it, truck drivers have it. You cannot drive a truck for over 10 hours, you gotta park it and sit down somewhere. It's the law.
I think that's what our sheriff is saying, that there are.
Yeah, but I believe that the police should be looked out. It could possibly worse.
We're not playing, I mean, I understand the analogy of football, but we're not playing football
No, you're not.
where Greene County Sheriff has a B line, a C line, a D line, and timeout.
People can die. You cannot allow people to work without a mandate.
You can't mandate every single solitary situation. You said it was disrespectful for her to interrupt you. It's just as disrespectful for you to interrupt me.
You're absolutely right, ma'am.
Thank you. It's not something that you can say black and white line. If you're involved in, if you respond to a scene of a 3-car accident where there's a fatality, you're off for 8 hours, you have to go see mental health before. Because you know what happens then? Now we have a 7-car accident down there that you don't have anybody to respond to. So you have to have the general principle of, you have the oversight, you have the watching, you have the people who are really a family, a very, very large family, but a very close first responder family that watch over each other, that are there for each other, that can report each other to those who don't know them, that are part of that. But if you have that steadfast rule of, if you're involved in a catastrophic incident, you're out. Like I said, the sheriff doesn't have a B line, C line, D line, or timeouts from the world. There should be, but there isn't, because the lawbreakers are not saying timeout.
Could I cut in for a minute? We want you to address us and not each other. That will help. So there's no friction back and forth. Address us with it. We're here to reform. I think that's why we're here.
Absolutely.
To help. And by hearing it, well, we want you to address us so that we can then take it and try to move those numbers from 95 to 99. That's why we're here. We're not here to point at no one or anything like that. Sean, there's some hands, Sean.
A question there?
Just to go back to the hours really quick, and I'll go to this one first. I understood 12 hours is a standard shift.
Correct.
And what's the weekly hour total standard?
Well, it depends on the schedule. Some days it's staggered. So, for instance, an officer could have Monday, Tuesday off, work Wednesday, Thursday, then have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. The following week it would be the opposite. The days that they had off, they work. The days that they work, they have off.
How many days off a year? That's the advantage of 12-hour shifts, is there's more days off in a year as well.
So you're averaging 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week?
Yeah, it's 84 hours.
It's 84 in a pay period.
Bi-weekly, yep.
84.
In 2 weeks.
In a pay period.
42 hours a week.
Roughly.
Question?
Yes, I heard a lot of talk of like mental health, like the mobile crisis unit, but I didn't hear much about individuals who are developmentally disabled, and I work with that population as well. And a lot of times they are also in crisis, and we do have to reach out to police officers because either they're physically like aggressive or like mentally we can't calm them down. So I didn't hear like that population mentioned at all. How do they fit into this category?
You know, that's a great point, and that is on me. I was remiss in including them in the conversation, and you bring up a really good point. That is on me. And I think that especially we have a lot of homes in Greene County, so I think there's definitely an opportunity to bring them to the table and present about some of the things that go on in their homes and in the community.
Because what I see often is like a lot of the time that we call the police, obviously we tried everything that we could have tried, and that person may be like ill or like very physically aggressive that we cannot contain that person. And I don't see much like mental support. I don't know if that's because of development for disabled, but they do have mental health issues as well. And what I'm saying is sometimes those mental health issues aren't addressed, and their disability is sometimes excused, and they're just sent back home, and there's no progress made.
Do you mean when they're sent to the hospital?
That's very rare. I'm just talking about when they have behavior, or
Gotcha.
like they become aggressive, or there's something going on where they can't, because sometimes they can't communicate, and they can't say I'm upset, or I'm
Right.
hurt, or I'm this, or I'm that. And the staff can't always, you know, sometimes they just get out of control, and it comes to the point where you have to protect the other individuals within the home, and you have to reach out to the cops. And then they calm down, and then they leave, and they're aggressive. So I just wanted to know, like, where do they fall into this category? There's a large number of homes in Greene County that service these individuals.
They will call on you, correct? They can call you.
Well, yes, I was going to speak to that, so.
Microphone?
I'm sorry?
Microphone?
Thank you. The one thing we do have in this county through the Child Access Center, because what we have is we have a family-friendly, confidential location to interview children and all of that. And through law enforcement, we do have MOUs with Homeland Security, with the FBI, and with law enforcement, where any adult who has a developmental disability can come to the CAC instead of going to a barracks, instead of going directly to the hospital to be interviewed in that setting where there is advocacy and mental health to help. We're trained to work with individuals with developmental delays, so law enforcement will oftentimes bring adults to the CAC to interview them and to work with them and find resources for them if they've been a victim of a crime or sometimes accused of a crime. That's a small piece that we have.
So if I just may ask, I mean, really you're concerned that before we should have some interaction before it gets to a situation where a police officer is called to assist? Is that what you're trying to get at? That we need more services?
Because I see all the services that, like, I wouldn't call them regular citizens, civilians get, but they don't get the same services. Like, if they're having a crisis, if they're independent, they may call them a crisis. We have people call them a crisis all the time. But people who are not independent, people who are not verbal, and they cannot reach out for that help. How do we know these agencies may not have the time? That's not the protocol. Sometimes we just call straight justice center. And then, you know, so these, sometimes they're overlooked, I would say. They don't get as much assistance as other people would get. There's no protocol, or there's no, I very rarely see somebody respond to the home, and it's very unlikely that they're leaving or getting medical treatment. Usually they're just, if they calm down, then it's just okay. Crisis averted, and then they leave, the issue is still there, and the person's still upset or aggressive. And so, like, you know, I don't see them benefit from a lot of these programs.
So, just to clarify too, do you utilize the START program? I know we have the START program, which is a crisis response program for specifically OPWDD. Do you utilize the START, or do you have crisis response stuff with the START program in the homes? So we do respond to homes. OPWDD is absolutely in our capture. We have gone to multiple homes. We do have a lot of phone contact with clients. A lot of times what happens if there's a safety concern, police will get called first to de-escalate, and then we encourage that the house or the police call us once they're calmer and the scene is safe, so we can talk and work with the individual after they're, you know, safe and calmed down. Safety for us is just as important to you, where we have to make sure that everyone is safe before we kind of interject into a situation. So you can always call us after someone has a crisis or there's been police. The police have called us to homes in the past after a situation where someone was calm and they didn't result in going to the hospital. I know a lot of times by the time if they get transported to the hospital, they will sometimes get referred to us for follow-up. But again, it's the developmental disability takes precedence over the mental health stuff. And the med management is very different. A lot of prescribers are not in the county. They go to Albany or Ulster County. Rensselaer County, Dutchess County, there's a lot of prescribers that are out. So I know that's very taxing on the community at large. And within OPWDD, I think statewide, there's about 1,400 open positions, right? I think it's a pretty high number. Yeah, yep, in this county included. Yeah, so there's definitely a staffing issue across the board. But you can always utilize us as mobile crisis. I know Greene County Mental Health is also accessible too. The clinic has the 24-hour crisis line. But I hear what you're saying, and police generally are the front lines to respond.
But it is a need, and it's a specialized area of training as well that's needed more of that in the community, because the START program is also one of the things that keep in mind as well.
Thank you.
Committee, do you have any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, it's your hand.
I do have a couple of questions. I'm going to make them. I was wondering who puts together the agenda for these meetings. Do you have those?
I normally put the agendas together. Tonight was put together for these presentations through MTAC.
Gotcha. And for the committee, is there any plan to have one of these meetings without the police presence? I've been doing some outreach around the area, and people are intimidated by coming into a room full of cops to talk about how you should reform the cops. I mean, they want to come, but they won't.
That's a committee decision,
Yeah.
for one, not mine. Hasn't been broached to me before, but I understand the point.
Yeah.
And,
Can I ask a question? What would you like to have on the agenda?
What do you mean? I don't have anything specific.
Oh, okay,
I'm going to put it together. Because today it just seemed like a day of a bunch of organizations coming together to talk about meeting.
Well, this is just one meeting. This is our third meeting, and different questions come and different people present. And as we come together, I think that'll be something that we'll talk about meeting with just us.
I just happen to know a bunch of people who would like to address the issue of that.
Okay. I think the overarching point tonight was to discuss mental health issues in the community and how it relates to calls to the police, calls through the dispatch center, and I mean right down the chain of command, depending upon the type of call for service it is. Next week, or in 2 weeks, the shift will be to substance abuse, and how that affects calls for service and how police interact then with someone who's having a substance abuse problem. And for me personally is how do we get into how to remove substance abuse issues from the community. It's something that's always, as a public administrator, it's something that's bothered me my whole career, because I just don't, the level of substance abuse, particularly when you get into the jail, I think you brought up the issue of the jail before. The new jail under construction is night and day from what the old jail was. I will freely admit that the old jail primarily warehoused people. There was no program. The whole design of the new jail is programmatic. And maybe one of our sessions should deal with that, because the people who are being arrested, if there is an underlying issue that's not being addressed, does that person then just come back in 6 months? Is that the driving force to a recidivism rate? And are we not addressing the issue? The law enforcement is not going to solve a substance abuse problem. They have to react to it. So what are we going to do as a community to try to address the issue? Because I don't think
You have to address the community needs.
well, you do.
At the time the jail was built, we're number 2 per capita in the state in overdoses.
Well, what are we doing? What are we doing to break? What are we doing to break the cycle? I guess that's, and that may be too much for this committee. I don't know, but that's certainly when you look at the people who reside in either a county jail or a state prison. I'm going to say that the majority of the underlying problem was going to be substance abuse at some point in their life, which got them there. How do we get out of it? So the whole design of the jail is meant to try to correct that. So,
Sorry, I have two more.
go ahead.
Is there any plan to make these meetings more accessible, like via Zoom, so that people can attend at home?
You mentioned that last time. We are filming tonight. It will be going on the website. We are trying to work out Zoom as well, just
That's
mechanically, some of the problems.
I mean, people can watch it after it already happens, but they don't have an opportunity to interact contemporaneously.
Yeah. What's that?
They can send in their questions.
They can send in questions. Yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
One more. As far as I know, this hearing also is in compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act. There's no one doing sign where there should be. If someone was in here who was hard of hearing, how would they even come to the hearing? How would they know what's happening? What are you guys doing here?
Okay, good point. Good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have some acquaintances who really are compromised and are quite worried about COVID. And they're reluctant to come to meetings where no one's wearing a mask, or some people aren't. Is this a mask optional situation? Or can people just sit here and not wear a mask? Because I'm concerned about it. We have, we lost 400,007 people in World War II. We're going toward that very quickly in the United States. We're, in just a couple of months, we'll overcome our casualties in World War II. So I would hope that would be taken more seriously here.
I see.
And I have another question.
Go ahead.
I am interested in the resources and how they're spent here. And I don't hear about many programs to address both addiction coming next week, domestic violence and altercations, before they actually become problems. I wonder if there is any program that I haven't heard about that presents negotiation, mediation tactics. Many communities I've experienced in the past have mediation programs and have training in these kind of techniques. And I'm hoping that that could perhaps be emphasized so that there's not such a burden on the police to deal with all domestic altercations. It could perhaps be dealt with through some other types of interventions before they exist.
There is common ground. Common ground dispute resolution, but not that it would be recommended for domestic violence. But there is common ground dispute resolution for other mediation.
Common ground cannot get involved if there's an order of protection. That's one of the, if there's a temporary order of protection, common ground cannot go into mediation. But I think really this is more the police reform. So trust me, there's a lot of reform that I think is necessary in trying to avoid substance abuse, domestic violence, etc. But by the time they get called, we're well beyond that.
Well, part of the police reform, as I understand it, is to look at how the resources are allocated in the community as a whole, and to see where is the suffering. I mean, there's tremendous sufferings and deaths of despair, accidents that young kids I know get into, and addictions. So are we really putting our resources there to prevent these things and to save the police from having yet another traumatic experience of seeing a child die in a motorcycle accident and or in a domestic violence scene? So I'm just hoping that we can look at what the budget is. The budget indicates what we are really concerned about, and look at what we might do to prevent some of these deaths of despair and self-destruction that we see in our community.
I have a very large budget in my mental health department, I can tell you that. That's not new. That's been around for a long time. We have 1,400, give or take, clients at any given time. So there is an effort. Maybe it's under the radar, but that's not something new to this county at all. Mental health is a very big focus in county government. The issue that came up previously were things like how to keep kids active, PAL type, police athletic league type associations. to get them, so there isn't a wayward teenager because they have nothing else to do when they're sitting home only doing this all day. So that's one of the ideas that has come up previously as to what can be done in the community so that the police aren't being called. The SRO program, I think, is a classic example of us being proactive. Cops aren't bad when you get to know them in school, with the examples been given here. That's new, however, within the last 2 years. Is there other community programs that aren't necessarily a part of a police budget or a sheriff budget, but are they a part of some other municipal budget to prevent that type of an action? Go ahead.
I was just wondering, Pastor, correct?
Yes.
Faith-based would be amazing for the families, for the domestic violence, in my humble opinion. Possibly working with the churches, the local churches, having the sheriffs come in and maybe speak during services, get to know them, get to know each other, and to give that forum for the church and for the sheriffs to learn about each other.
Yes, I agree. That's why we have, I can't speak for all churches, but that's why we have what I call a triangle. We have the church, the person or persons, and community action, or maybe I'm called, oh, I'm sorry, Florence.
Keep moving.
We kind of to work together. So it does help. It doesn't prevent, it doesn't stop, but it does help. And that's why we're here in the community to try to do something to help in domestic violence.
I'm talking just in community togetherness, openness to communication, lets the church and the members in the community have a safe space to come and meet the officers, get to know them by name.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Right. The more you get to, I've noticed anyway, the more I've worked with the sheriffs through the family court, the more I get to know them, the more I get to talk to them, the more accessible they become, the more comfortable everyone becomes with clients, et cetera. So the more that communication is open. So maybe just an invite for community meetings and churches.
Yes, it would be something that I would bring. I think I have my deacon here tonight, so I think that's something that we will push more. We haven't went to Sheriff Pete. I just met Sheriff Pete when we did the commercial. So me and Sheriff Pete is we're starting a relationship. But through the local police, we have a good bond where that happens a lot. Where they come in, we don't have, it's very close. That's a good move for the community, that we get to know each other. The more we know, the better we know each other, the easier the temperature can come down.
So at Temple Israel of Catskill, we have benefited greatly from the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department coming in and speaking to us. We've asked them both a number of times different issues, and we've had a wonderful turnout. Sometimes we've opened it up to the community, just as anybody who wants to come. Other times it's just been for our community, because there were issues that just involved us. And we were about to have the police department come and do a program for our religious school with the kids, and then COVID hit, so that didn't happen. But I think the more that can happen, as the officers have said, in schools, in houses of worship, where it's just normal to meet an officer, to speak to an officer, to find out they're human, is only beneficial for the whole community. And I just wanted to respond to the gentleman who was saying about wanting to have these meetings without officers. Personally, I've benefited greatly because I'm here, before I can recommend anything to anyone, I need to learn. This is really, for me, like I'm at school. I'm learning. I need to ask questions. I'm so glad everybody's presenting. And so the officers have been wonderfully helpful in educating me about really what they do. And what they do, I had no idea they did so many different things and were involved in so many different aspects of our community's life and the health of our community. I can understand that some people would not feel comfortable with officers, and maybe so many officers, but I will say this, that myself, I would want officers here because of the topic that we're here discussing. I would want them here at least for our protection. Just because this is a public meeting about an issue that involves officers, and I think is great to have security.
And I also believe that there are ways to make a mission, which is, I mean, you depend on the police for your work. She mental health depends on the police for her work. He's connected to the church, and I mean, the police are involved there. I mean, is anyone here have an independent mind that isn't connected to the police? Are you not inherently biased?
I would say this to what you're saying. Every person on the planet is inherently biased.
Yes, you're right. I have but I'm talking about specifically for police.
So you're right. I have a relationship. We all have different relationships, but our job is to learn and to be educated so that we can be able to make a sound and healthy recommendation.
Would you be able to make a sound and healthy recommendation that maybe push the police out of the work area?
I can only say that all of our job is to be as reasonable and unbiased as is possible so that we can help support our community. I don't think it's a bad thing that we have various relationships with the police. I think it's healthy.
I think this entire meeting has been giving the police a round of applause.
Has been what?
I think this entire meeting has been giving the police a round of applause. I understand maybe hard work, and I understand they're connected to a bunch of different agencies, which I don't think they should be, especially mental health. I don't think that a cop should be the first person you call in mental health ever. Ever. It's not their job, they're not trained for it. Mental health should be the person called. And if that means they need more money, then take it out of their fund. That's what defund and reinvest is all about. We are not investing in community need.
So I just want to stop you as mental health and as crisis. You know, there's a video that they were going to show that's very triggering for me to even watch. And this is stuff, my staff have been assaulted by not calling police. We didn't know what we were walking into. We've had guns pulled on us, knives pulled on us. I had to send 2 staff to the hospital that were assaulted in a different county. You know, we go where we think we're safe. We're not taking police with us every call. But if a mental hygiene call comes in through 911, that is an immediate need of that person, and that is why they called 911.
Well, how does a person get that deeply in a crisis?
Because
you don't have enough resources.
But we're not going to go back and forth about the resources. This was a perfect opportunity for people to talk about their work with police and how we interact and where improvements can be made. I think all of the presenters have talked about where we interact and where there could be improvements. And ultimately, in our community, what I heard was that we all work really collaboratively. I'm not saying that nationally that's not an issue. I'm not saying that in other parts of the state that's not an issue. And I can hear what you're saying, but I want to understand how we work collaboratively together as providers that are separate entities from the police department, and how they have stepped up to either help or where we have improved processes because of things that have happened. So the work is being done, you know, and I need you to take that into consideration, that we're talking about our community. I have absolutely talked to the sheriff's office when I have had issues with calls or things that come up, you know, and we continue to do this on a day-to-day, you know, as things arise. And you have to understand, and I know you come from Greenville, but technically you live in Albany County. You know, we're addressing our community and the needs that we have. I think you,
Why is that public knowledge?
you announced it at the last hearing, at the last meeting.
I live in Greenville.
That's what she said.
Yeah. So, you know, part of that is we're addressing the community that we serve. And I have reached out to the youth clubhouses, the school district, like we're all doing our own backup to talk to our community and see where the issues are and if there are issues. You know, again,
What in
this,
that manual does it say that you can address 7 different police agencies before the commission?
well, we're not addressing, we're just looking at the sheriff's office. We're not looking at the local municipalities. They all have their own separate boards
So there's separate commissions for each one?
for
Yes,
each one.
In the last meeting that I was at, there was like, everyone was there.
But at the
Every
first,
individual law enforcement agency has to go through this same exercise and produce their own report. The last session, we just included them so that this committee could get an understanding of how the other agencies operate, because depending upon where you live in the county, when you call for service, it might be a green car, a red car, a blue car, a white car. So that's why we brought in the other chiefs. But this committee is only here to discuss the sheriff's department.
and it was said at the first meeting.
Those other towns or those other villages are having their own meetings.
Where are they announcing this
That's
at?
up to the
Reach
town.
out to the local. Yeah, they've, the question when it was put to them 2 weeks ago, I think half of them hadn't started yet. And I think Catskill had just had one meeting themselves. So they all have to go through this individually, and they all have to report out and submit to the governor by April 1st. Go ahead.
2 questions. One, how is the committee assembling a list of items to deliberate? How is that being organized? And is there any opportunity for transparency to list the potential reforms?
We haven't even gotten there yet.
We haven't
even gotten there yet.
No, I'm just,
We
okay.
haven't gotten there yet.
A lot of things.
We're meeting, we're listening to you. They're recording it, then we're gonna deliberate on it and try to find reforms where we could bring in to present it to the governor. Is that what we have, is that why we're here?
I agree. I guess what I'm saying is that I've been at the meeting, I've heard a lot of things thrown up on the wall. Is anybody tracking what's been thrown on the wall?
Of course. We have minutes being taken, the minutes are being posted. I'm taking notes, they're taking notes.
Okay.
If I could, maybe I could, when we met, we needed you. Because if we did, when we first met, we don't hear the community. So we had to set up the meetings so that you can come and say what you have to say. Then we take it, she's recording it, then we come back. Give us a chance. We hear what you're saying, and we can't do it without you.
I really wasn't being, I was just asking a question. I'm not trying to be retarded. The second question, sorry. The second question I had, I don't know that we've been addressing yet, but I would like to keep a pin in it, is that the scope of the committee does go down to resources. And when it comes down to understanding our scope, I know that we're technically required to only look at the sheriff's department, but I believe that it's appropriate to consider our jurisdiction to the county. And I would really like to see an assessment by the committee of the total policing of our county, right? So while the sheriff's department is maybe, along with the state troopers, are the only 2 organizations who are operating in certain areas of the county in the middle of the night, that's appropriate. But then do we have perhaps too many local police? Do we have maybe an excess of state police? There's a question that I'm hearing an undercurrent in these meetings where, because the state police are not accountable to a program like the one we are engaged in right now, we need to really think about the whole county's health when it comes to how police are funded.
Well,
right?
The sheriff, as I said in the earlier meetings, the sheriff is a constitutional office. The towns and villages, those police departments were created by those towns and villages. Nobody else had that decision to make but that town or village.
But the Constitution doesn't require any more than a sheriff's office existing, is that correct?
But that's what he's saying.
That's my point. Those communities decided to go above the sheriff's or state police operations in their town or their village.
They made that choice based on what? Based on
Their decision. They vote to have a police department.
I understand that. I guess what I'm getting at is that how do we know that the size of the sheriff's office is correct? How do we know how that is measured in a holistic view of state police coverage and local town coverage?
Well, it depends upon what metrics you want to use. I believe it's 2.5 uniform per 1,000 residents is a national guideline. So we have 27 sheriff's deputies. 2.5 times 47,000 is 100 people. So this department's not overstaffed.
You're not, but the total count between all the agencies.
But those citizens in those towns decided to create those police departments. That's their decision.
Even if we added all the police officers in Greene County, we don't make the.
No, there's not. It's not. There's a question with no answer. What's that?
For the benefit of the county, I think I would like to see that math, that homework done for the total policing of the county. That's all I guess what I'm asking.
He just told you. If you added up all the personnel.
Yeah, but there are different ways of measuring the appropriate.
Great. What metrics do you want to use?
There are several different options. I'm asking what's being used and what do we stand against that?
So again, I don't know if that's something that the committee can fully make a decision on or evaluate. That has nothing to do with us and the police reform. That's a staffing. And again, we don't have any jurisdiction over the individual towns and villages that have police departments. And I think it's important to remember again that a lot of those are not full-time employees. I think Catskill's the only one that has full-time, if I remember from last session. But, you know, that's not something that, you know, I think the priority is going to be the needs of the community, not necessarily the number based on the amount of people. I mean, I don't know, committee, if you want to hear that and
And I think we can answer that.
We can take it.
Once we get together, we can answer that and we can put it on the website and show the answer. He's asking questions, so we can.
It's not a bad question, but if the town of Durham decides to have a police department, that's a town decision.
Yeah, we went through that, we know, but they asked a question on it and that's what we explained.
This is off topic, thank God.
Thank you.
And I work for prevention services, but I live in Greene County, but I work in Columbia County. And when this lady here was talking about like prevention, like recidivism or whatever, one of the things that I don't see, and I'm not quite sure what happens here, is like when we have treatment team meetings or when we have assessing the family and their needs. Because at the end of the day, the prevention workers or maybe Columbia County DSS or Greene County DSS are the people in the homes at least 3 times a week, twice a week. So they see a lot more. They see the family outside of the crisis. So they see like when you can prevent things or when things are escalating and things of that nature. I think that it would be beneficial where I heard a lot of people step forward and say they work with families. If these families were more involved in the treatment team meetings and the service plans and how we work with the families, how we interact, and how we give them like safety plans and things of that nature, that would be more beneficial to them because we all know that when people are escalated, they're not able to receive or learn during that time. So if we can teach them things while they're calm and ready to learn, that would be more beneficial.
Well, one of my plans is to have our DSS commissioner come into one of these sessions to talk to the committee about what services they're providing and to whom. Because a lot of these folks are coming in with and don't take this the wrong way, committee, with an ignorance factor about who's supplying and who's silo. So a lot of this is their education requirement. But you got to know, but you have to understand what the problem is. Where does it escalate from? and why? As I said before, law enforcement is not going to solve someone's drug problem. Wrong agency.
No, yeah, I think that, like sometimes we see, like say if there's an issue in the home, there's a drug problem, and maybe the parents go to mental health or whatever, and the school sees something with the child, and the child sends a referral to maybe DSS, and DSS has prevention services to another agency. And the agency goes in and works with the entire family. So now we make sure that these people are maintaining their appointments, but at the end of the day, my agency opens 8:30 to 4:30. So after 4:30, if something happens, I won't know until somebody tells me. If the police respond to the home, I might not come in. If the family don't tell me, if I don't get an email, I may not know there was interaction until the client may, tell me that. So what I'm saying is if we all like kind of be cohesive and work together, we can kind of help our issues. Like if I see something escalating, I can say, hey, call their mental health worker. I just want to let you know I was at the home at 2 o'clock today and so-and-so was, I think he's kind of getting escalated. Maybe you should reach out to them. And then, so we're all familiar with each other because we all kind of service the same. Greene County is not that big. So if there's 100 agencies, we all kind of service the same population and the same people. And if we're providing the services, I think that we all should have some type of interaction with one another so that we know kind of what's going on. I might be able to give you a side of the information that you may not see when they come to your office. And maybe they come to your office and I don't see that in your home. So we can help each other out. I think that's a huge part of the prevention part.
I love that question and I love that topic. The issue that we have, I think, across the board is consent and information sharing because they have to sign like a multidisciplinary consent that has like multiple people and agencies on it, which has been a huge barrier, I think. And Julianne, you and I have talked about this in the past, not to throw you back onto the bus. But, this is something that has come up and having bigger teams. I know Columbia County has the MDT, which is the multidisciplinary team that we specifically go over adult high utilizers. Greene County has adult SPOA. They have children's SPOA, which is the single point of access, which is a very large group. But I think you bring up a good point about better coordination.
Lauren?
That I failed to mention that we do with community action. Number one is a partnership with Greene County DSS. We do have a program, I'll talk this way. We do have a program, Healthy Homes, so a family at risk of CPS, Child Protective Services intervention, due to unhealthy living conditions. We have a caseworker that'll go in that home and work with them, look at the whole family, and we work with DSS and identify strengths and try to get that family back on track. And then resources for prevention. We have the Greene County Peer Court is new within the last 2 years. And a lot of the people here on this committee are on the advisory council. Monica has assisted in the trainings. But first-time youthful offenders under the age of 18 who are nonviolent, rather than going into the court system, they go before a jury of their peers. It's actually students, high school students that are trained, and I think we have 4 of the 6 school districts working with us, where they take on the roles of the different court personnel, and they, rather than a punishment,